Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's so nice to see everyone back again. Well, kind of see. I see your names. I don't see you. So I missed you guys. I missed everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. And again, please, by all means, remember you can put yourself on video. You can unmute. Whatever you're comfortable with. So I wanted to, sticking with our format. First of all, I got some kind of like a terrible stomach bug returning from Israel. So the Baruch Hashem, I'm feeling much better today. But I've kind of like put the shiur together a little bit, a little bit at a time. And I'm as promised, I want to start talking about the subject of Gilgulim and reincarnation in this class. And I can tell you, most certainly, it's going to go beyond one class. I'm going to try to do a hard stop right at 11 o'clock. Okay, great. So I'm going to try to do a hard stop right at 11. And this is a subject that I want to really ease into. I like to use the analogy that when you are sleeping in a pitch black room, what is the kinder, gentler way to wake someone up? Is it to go in and throw on all the lights at once so that it's a total shock to the system? Or is it much, much nicer if the light is on a dimmer switch that you very slowly and surely put the dimmer switch up a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until you're on full brightness. So this is a subject that is not the kind of subject that you can just jump into and throw the lights on. It's the kind of subject that needs to be built up slowly. And I'll tell you why. I know I had the thought to do this subject of Gilgulim and reincarnation before I went to Israel. But after I went to Israel, and Baruch Hashem have come back safely, thank God, I can tell you without question that this might be the single most important subject that I've ever spoken about in all my history of lecturing. And so even though some view the subject as being somewhat controversial or getting into more esoteric ideas and things like that, I would like to teach it in such a way that it's not presented in that way. We are going to talk about things related to the spiritual realm versus the physical realm and that kind of thing. But nothing that is so out there and nothing that would be considered quote unquote asur or anything like that. So these are all subjects. Everything I'm going to take are from very well-known, well-respected sources. And I want to present it to you in such a way that you understand that to not know this subject, even superficially, is to be completely flying blind throughout the course of your life. That is really the bottom line of how I view the importance of this subject. So having said that, just going back to kind of my initial, structure for the class, I want to start. So the title for this shiurim will be, Gilgulim and reincarnation. Obviously, reincarnation is the translation of Gilgul, and it's going to be part one. And we'll see what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be 2 sessions, 3 sessions. I'm not sure. Let's see where it takes us. But again, I want it to be done in a very methodical and logical and to deal with a very complex, complicated subject in as simple, pashut of a way as we can, so that it becomes meaningful and something that you can integrate into your consciousness and into your daily lives for it to be helpful to you. For thank yous, I want to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I was able to go to my trip to Israel and come back safely, Baruch Hashem, spend the time with my daughter and be in Eretz HaKodesh, and thank my husband and also my parents who helped out during my absence from being home, and all my friends who called to check in and say hello to everyone here while I was away. I appreciate that very much. Dedications. If you have a dedication that you would like to make the shiur in dedication of, please feel free to go ahead and post it in the chat. I have Refuah Shlema for Alfred ben Regina and Danielle ben Hannah. There's also, I don't know the names, but I'm going to say Le'ilui Nishmas, the 3 people in Muncie, 2 men and 1 woman, who have passed in the last, I think, week. week to 2 weeks. I don't know their names, but let's dedicate our shiur Leilui Nishmas, those three. I know one was a 52-year-old woman who was very sadly hit by a car and killed on the spot when she was walking. So we'll make this Leilui Nishmas for her and the two other men that passed. A shidduch for Aviva Bas Bracha. If anyone has anything else, you can either say it now in your mind, say it out loud, put it in the chat, whatever you prefer. Okay, so I wanted to, before we get into the subject, I wanted to share a little bit, if it's okay with you, about my trip to Eretz Yisrael and give you some impressions and some takeaways. For those of you who have been recently, it's always such a blessing to go. For those of you who haven't been or haven't been in a while, I highly encourage you to try to make it, to go and visit the Kotel and visit the Shechina. The complexities and the paradoxes of Eretz HaKodesh are so stark. That a place could be, on the one hand, so holy and so special and so beautiful, and be mired with such political heaviness, such constant threat. While I was there, were the two bombings in Givat, what is it called? Givat Sharim. It's right at the entrance of Yerushalayim, as well as in Ramot. I actually was on a bus with my daughter. Just an hour after it happened, the bus drove right past where the bomb had gone off, and there was all the emergency medical people and the police, and doing investigation and all of this. And this is
share the story like 2 weeks ago.
Huh? Yeah. Oh, okay. And this is, hi Gabi, how are you? And this is Israel. I mean, this is how people are living in Israel. They are going about with their daily lives. The buses continue. Everything continues. People are going to work. They're going to shul. They're going to school. And all the while, there is just an overarching looming threat that something's going to explode at a bus stop. It's very different. I was talking with my husband about that you're not going to see over there like what we see here in LA. You're not going to see the homelessness and the filth, right? You don't really see that as much at all. It's a different type of but you don't see that, but then you have this like existential threat that's just looming. Depending on where you go, it feels more or feels less. But when you talk about where those two bombs went off on that, I think it was a Wednesday morning. These are major intersections. Ramot is a completely from community, and where the bomb went off, it's a major intersection. It's like 6 or 8 streets that are merging in all different directions, and the husband of the secretary, my daughter's seminary, was severely injured. But he is the one, I found out, by the way, if you haven't seen already, the picture circulating of the book of Tehillim, where the shrapnel from the explosion went through part of the book and stopped at the pasuk that said something along the lines of that, if I'm recalling correctly, like Tehillim can save your life, and so on and so forth. Like, it's mamash a nest, like an open nest. So he was in bad shape, but the Tehillim stopped the one shrapnel that could have really hurt him. He had it in his pocket, and he was in the hospital, but he's doing much better, and they're already talking about him going home. So even within all of the devastation and within the terror, Hashem puts in miracles for us to hold on to. So Israel is just this very complex place of holiness and this overarching kind of feeling of concern that's sitting there day in and day out. I was thankfully able to go to the Kotel a couple different times. Very interesting what's happening in the Kotel. It's very interesting how many foreigners are going there. Because it was wintertime, most of the people were dressed. I've been there when it's warmer and people are not dressed. They don't understand where they are. Obviously, it's Kodesh Kodashim, and to go there in its tznius and covered way is very appropriate. But it is. It's definitely something to see. There's a lot of Asian people, a lot of Christian people. People from all over the world are coming to experience it, and to understand why it's there and what's the importance. And everybody making their own cheshbon of how they connect to this very, very sacred space. So I was actually. I was really literally all over the country. I can't even explain to you how. I don't know how I do it. I kind of go there and I put myself in Hashem's hands and I'm like, take me where you want me to be. And I was able to go to Hebron for Parshas Chayei Sarah. I was not there for Shabbat. I went the day before because I know it's a big balagan over there. I was able to get in and out of Hebron literally before they were setting up all of the roadblocks with the police, the Mishtara, and the army, and whoever's there to navigate traffic. Even the driver was like, I don't know what kind of mazal you have. They literally were driving out of the city and they put the block. It was like unbelievable. So I was able to go and daven by Sarah Imenu and Avraham Avinu, and so special. And then from there we went to Kever Rachel, which is also always so wonderful and meaningful. I was in the north in Tzfat for Shabbat. And exactly, as I was in Tzfat for Shabbat, it was very beautiful. I was to the south. I was fortunate enough to get in to see a Rav that my husband's cousin told me about. His name is Rav Nir Ben Artzi. He's a very special kind of rabbi. He's not a Kabbalist, but he's really more tremendous intuition. And you can go and speak to him about your questions and concerns you have. And he kind of like, I don't know how else to say it, downloads information for you. And it was 20 minutes of him being spot on about everything he said. Really remarkable. He has a yeshiva in the south, so it was like an hour and a half south. Went there. So Baruch Hashem, really all over the place. Got to see the beauty of the land and the people and the warmth, and very, very special. Baruch Hashem, thank God. So if you can go anytime soon, I highly encourage you to go and swim in the environment of Eretz HaKodesh, especially the beautiful sites of tzaddikim and the holy places that you can go there. Okay, as far as our tzaddik of the week, I would like to talk with you a little bit about Rav Avram Dov Me'avrich, otherwise known as the Bas Ayin. The Bas Ayin is the name of his most well-known book. And I want to read you a little bit about him. He was the rabbi of Tzfat. If you know the story, he is the one who was there during the great earthquake of Tzfat. So I'll read to you what they say here, but then I'm going to add a little something that I learned from a different source. So it says, so his yahrzeit is the 12th of Kislev, which falls out on December 6th of this year. So I believe that's next Tuesday. So you can light a candle for him on his yahrzeit. He was a tremendous Kabbalist, and he was the head Ashkenazi Rav of Tzfat. He moved, he was originally from Ukraine in Avrich and later in Zitomir, and then in 1830 he moved to Eretz Yisrael and he became the chief rabbi there of Tzfat. Let's see. During 1837 earthquake in Tzfat, Rav Avram Dov foresaw the disaster moments before it occurred and managed to save many of his congregation who were in the midst of the mincha prayers. His book, The Bas Ayin on the Torah, is well respected in Hasidic circles. Rav Avram Dov of Avrich is buried in the Tzfat cemetery. He's actually buried, I've been there several times, he's buried in a cave where in order to get in there, you have to literally duck down, like really, really duck yourself down in order to go into the cave. And it's written that part of why he wanted to be buried in such a location was because he wanted anyone who came to visit him, to visit his kever, to be reminded that one of the most important elements of being a human being is to be humble. And how do we remind ourselves that we're humble? We have to bend. We have to bend ourselves, and we have to bow ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to understand that we're nothing other than His creation. And so I thought that's a little interesting thing. Also, in regards to specifically this experience with the earthquake that I had read in a different source, is that when the earthquake began to hit, it's written that the Rav, he understood immediately, based on how the stones of the walls were flying across at each other. They were not falling down to the ground as you might typically think in an earthquake. The stones themselves of the walls were being shot across one another in the shul. He called his entire congregation to come to him underneath his davening, basically, right by the Aron HaKodesh, and he said, prayers to Hashem to help save, and he prostrated himself on the ground and had his people around him. He understood that the Satan was at war, essentially, and was responsible for what was going on with how the stones were flying across the room. And it's my understanding that when everything was said and done, the only thing that was left of his shul was literally the ceiling floating above his head and everything that had been right around him and his people. And as was written, he was able to save many, many people from injury and death in that earthquake that were in his congregation. I was not able to go in there and actually see the shul. My understanding is it's still there. And they've, of course, repaired it and the thing, but you can, I guess, see in the ceiling where they made the repairs. So I think that would be something so fascinating to see. I've yet to be able to see that, but I think it would be something pretty remarkable and incredible to see. So that's the Bas Ein, Rav Avram Dov Me'avrich, and you can light candles for him on the 12th of Kislev, coming up next week, I think Tuesday. I think it's Monday night and Tuesday, if you can double check. Okay, everyone good? Everyone still there? The name of the rabbi, Rabbi Avraham Dov from Avrich. Avrich is where he's originally from, Avritch, otherwise known as the Bas Ein, which is the name of his most well-known book. He's a huge Kabbalist and Tzaddik. If I'm recalling, he's the one who had suggested that you every single day read Tehillim 91. Tehillim 91. As a means of, the rabbi I visited in Israel. Okay, I'll tell you. Let me finish this thought. 91 is the Tehillim for protection, Shmira. And if you can read it every day, it's a tremendous Shmira for you and your family. 91. I don't know what the Hebrew is. If anybody knows the numbers really well in the Hebrew, you can say. Otherwise, Tehillim number 91. Yoshev Beseter. The rabbi I visited in Israel is Rabbi Nir Ben Artzi. Nir Ben Artzi. Probably you can find him on the internet. He's in the south of Israel, and he also has a book or two. I got a book for my husband on the Parsha that he wrote. But you can probably find him on the internet. Okay. All right. Any other questions or anything before we get into the subject? All right, so let's do this. So I'm using two sources right now. That one of them is by Rav Aryeh Kaplan, who was one of the most prolific writers in general, but he was an American rabbi, one of the most prolific authors. He's written on all different kinds of subjects, but in the later years of his life, he was writing a lot about Kabbalah and bringing concepts about spirituality, the soul, those types of things into the world and into America. He's a native English speaker, so he writes very, very well, and his books didn't need to be translated from Hebrew. Now, they've been translated from English into multiple languages, but so this is the book that I'm referencing today. It's a book called Inner Space by Rav Aryeh Kaplan. I've read it multiple times. It's the kind of book that is, it's not a light read, and it's not an easy read. And he gets into all kinds of esoteric subjects, but I'm going to help pull from this book to lay the foundation and groundwork of some of the stuff I want to talk about related to Gilgulim. And then the other book, which is from Harav Avigdor Miller, Olam Haba, which interestingly enough, Rav Avigdor Miller was really the antithesis of a Kabbalistic rabbi. He did not get involved in that stuff at all. He was very much, everything that he takes from is from the text, the Gemara, Mishnah, all of those kinds of sources. And I'm even going to read to you in the back of the book where there's a very short chapter that he addresses the idea of Gilgulim, and it's very funny because he's basically saying that's not my jam. That's not. I don't talk about that because that wasn't the path of my learning. Okay, so it's going to be very interesting to kind of look at one with a Rav Aryeh Kaplan and then go into a Rav Avigdor Miller and see what he talks about. So, so on that note, let's begin. Before I start going into the subject, I would like to understand when I say something like Gilgul or reincarnation, the translation of the word Gilgul, just based on anything you've ever been exposed to, based on anything you've ever read, if you don't mind to unmute yourself and just share with me a little bit about what first comes to mind. You don't have to censor yourself. It doesn't have to be, it could really just be anything. I want everyone to get a flavor for how this subject has been perceived and approached in the past based on everything that you've been witness to date. Is there anybody who would be willing to kind of begin kicking off that discussion? When I say Gilgul or reincarnation, what comes to mind?
Re-entering the world after your death.
Okay.
In a certain form.
Okay. Okay, what is re-entering? That's okay. You can say I don't know, or I'm. It's fine. There's no right or wrong here. We're just opening discussion.
Rebirth.
Okay, a rebirth. Okay, thank you. Who else?
For me, hello everyone. Thank you, Dr. Mia. We missed you. So for me, I see reincarnation as compassionate and gracious way to repair.
Okay. Okay, so
tikkunim.
Tikkunim. Okay, so tikkun is the Hebrew word for correction. So the translation of tikkun is correction. And oftentimes the concept of Gilgul, of reincarnation, goes hand in hand with the concept of tikkun, which is correcting. Okay, very good. Excellent. Okay, what else?
I remember going to some classes at Torah Or many years ago, and they were talking about the subject and saying that many pieces of souls can go back into one soul or a specific tikkun.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the, you see books and think of reincarnation it's just you're coming back for a second life and it's just one soul.
Mm-hmm.
It can be many different souls or pieces of that soul in this one particular person that has to go through this particular tikkun to refine that soul so it can, move forward.
Yeah, excellent.
Which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, it is very, very interesting, and it's also very accurate. So that's correct. So that's a little bit of a higher, that's a higher level now of discussion on the idea of reincarnation, the idea that it's not necessarily a whole soul that can come back, and can be parts of a soul that come back, the nitzatzot, pieces of the neshama that can come back to make the tikkun. It doesn't have to be a full reincarnation. It can be multiple different things in the soul. So that's all correct. Yes, Mia, did you want to say something?
Well, I was actually going to say something similar, which is I printed it out, so I read it out loud to myself every Shabbat about how the levels of our soul, which my understanding is that there are 5, do come back in various formulations, you could say, or combinations, just like she said. But they cannot grow unless they're attached to a body. That's why our body and the mitzvot are so important, because it's really you call it ethereal if you want to. The ethereal parts of us that we cannot see are all dependent on having the vessel, and the vessel doing and being what the vessel is supposed to in this lifetime do and be. And furthermore, this is the really part that really blows me, is that once there is no longer a body for this collection of parts, they are not connected in the world to come.
Okay, so the last part I'm not sure if I follow. But the first thing you said is correct. The idea that in order to make any change, correction, to implement, to do a mitzvah, to make a tikkun, the soul or the part of the soul must be in a physical body. Once the physical body is no longer, then there's not a connection to the physical world. Maybe that's what you mean, unless I'm misunderstanding what you said. That when the neshama leaves the body, so there's a very thin thread that stays connected to the body, right? This is why when, for example, you would go to visit a kever of a tzaddik, right? There's some aspect of the soul that stays connected to the body, but the soul itself is going up to Shamayim. And then depending on whether it comes down in another body, and like we've touched on, that it needs other things to correct, or it's going to continue to build its olam haba, which we'll get into. So there is this vessel that we have of the physical body that is our primary tool through which to do mitzvot, through which to build our olam haba, and through which to make tikkunim, refinement, correction to our soul. So without this physical body, we cannot do all of those things that we need to do and that Hashem wants us to be able to do. Once the neshama goes in Shamayim and goes, God willing, to Gan Eden or wherever it's going to go, then that's it. That's the threshold. Whatever you've earned, whatever you've built for yourself, that's what you're going to have. Unless Hashem decides that for whatever reason, you or a part of you needs to come back down and either do it better or continue to refine. Or maybe your Gilgul could be in the form of God, also, God forbid, chas v'shalom loleinu, of a punishment of some kind, right? You don't necessarily get the schus to reincarnate as a human being, depending upon your behavior and your averos and so on and so forth. That's a little bit of a different subject. But just to understand that we have the spiritual world, which is really the world of the soul and the matrix, and that being that comes from Hashem, as a part of Hashem, into the physical body that is in this physical world. And those two things work together in order to accomplish Hashem's intention for man on earth and in the context of his entire creation. So that's a gigantic concept, okay? But I want to read from a little bit from this book of Inner Space, different parts, so we can start building a foundational understanding, A, of why we're here, B, of the tools that Hashem has given us spiritually and physically, and C, how does all of that fit together in the purpose of Hashem's creation so that we can elevate to the greatest level possible and ultimately reap the greatest of rewards, which is actually olam haba. So olam haba, literally the translation is world to come. So if olam haba is the spiritual world that is our ultimate goal, when our neshama leaves this body and this world, how do we call this world? Does anybody know?
Olam hazeh.
Yes, olam hazeh, this world. So we have olam hazeh, this world, and olam haba, the world to come. Okay? Now, one thing that I find to be quite interesting is that there's a significant portion of the Jewish population in this world that is completely and totally unaware and oblivious to the fact that Judaism even involves the concept of reincarnation. If you ask Jews, maybe even some Orthodox Jews, I don't know, but if you ask, let's say, for sure the majority of Reform and conservative Jews, as I was one of them growing up, conservative Jewish, they think that reincarnation is like a Hindu concept, right, or a Buddhist concept. They don't understand that the whole basis for the idea of a Gilgul, of reincarnation, is straight from Judaism. And I know when I heard that, I was totally shocked. I had no idea, let alone hearing about the concept of Olam Haba, right? So if you're going through this world, especially as a Jewish soul, and you're not having a foundational understanding of what is a Gilgul, and what your purpose is, why Hashem created you, and why you are working towards this thing called Olam Haba, so then what are you actually doing here? You're without a map, you're without a roadmap, you're without a guidance system, you're without Waze, you're without GPS, right? You're just going, you're just breathing, you're moving through life. Maybe you're a nice person, maybe you're not so nice person, but in the end, where are you going? So if you don't understand the idea of Gilgul and Tikkun in Olam Haba, then there's no way possible you can maximize your time in this body. No way, right? When you start to learn about the greatest of great of our tzaddikim, one thing that you will read consistently throughout history about tzaddikim is that they valued every single second. Every single second of their time was accounted for. There was no such thing as wasting time because they understood that the value of every breath in their body was building towards their Olam Haba, was building towards the fulfillment of their purpose, was building towards the greatness of Am Yisrael. That because we are all connected, because all of Am Yisrael is connected, that the more they contributed and accomplished, the more they're elevating all of Am Yisrael. Now, I want to pause here for a second and talk about a really important concept. The idea of equality and spirituality. Okay? Equality in a Torah lens is a political construct. Has nothing to do with Judaism. The concept of equality has nothing to do with Torah living and the concepts of Torah. There's no such thing. The idea that everyone is created equal, right? It's a fallacy. This is untrue. If everyone was created equal, everyone would be on the same spiritual level, everyone would have the same intellect, everyone would have the same gifts, whether it's to play an instrument, to study Torah, to read, to speak, to whatever it is, okay? If equality was a real thing in spirituality, everyone would be the same. Okay? So we know that's not the case. How do we know? Because we know through... Go ahead.
Does it come when Mashiach is coming? That we would be all equal at that time?
It's an excellent question. I'm really not sure. I mean, what I know for certain is that the idea when Mashiach comes, it's written that all the evil and all of those that are, quote unquote, enemies of Hashem are going to be eliminated from the earth. And everyone who will remain are all going to be of Day Hashem. They're all going to be faithful servants of Hashem. They're all going to be people of a spiritual mindset, ilk, level, that they are understanding why they're here, and they're understanding that they're part of Hashem's creation, and they're understanding their role in the world as relates to Torah and Mashiach and Hashem's creation. I'm sorry, say that again?
there will be equality there.
I don't know. I don't know if equality is the right word, and I'll tell you why. Because, for example, even we know in the times of Mashiach, everyone had different roles, right? Otherwise, we would not have something called a Kohen or a Levi or a Israeli, right? The job of the Kohen is different than the job of any other person in Am Yisrael, right? Especially in the days of Mashiach. Only certain people could perform certain avodas Hashem in the Mishkan, right? Only the Kohen Gadol could enter into a Kodesh HaKodeshim. So if that's the case, if there's only literally one person who can do one job, one might say that that person is greater than all the rest or holds a greater responsibility than all the rest, which is why I say to you that I don't know that equality is really a concept that enters into the conversation when it comes to Hashem's creation and Torah living. There are differences in ability and in responsibility, in achrayus of what somebody is meant to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're equal. It doesn't also necessarily mean they're unequal. I don't know. I don't have a solid answer for you. But I'm not comfortable with the word equal, because I don't think that's why we're here. I don't think that when we are in a Gilgul, which all of us are, right, in some way, shape, or form. If we're physically here, there are no new souls being brought into the world now at this time in these days before Mashiach. What Hashem has to do is bring all the souls from throughout history, all the good and all the bad, back into physical form, so that when Mashiach comes, every single soul will stand before Hashem in its judgment, and Hashem will make His determination on who is staying and who is going and in what way, right? And so, and that is written about in multiple sources, all right, especially in the Nevi'im and so forth. So we know that that's a process that is going to take place. You think about it, it's very interesting if you think about it in the context of what's happening in the world, right? Everybody talks about the idea that divorce is an epidemic, right? In our world today, the concept of divorce is an epidemic, even throughout the frum communities. There's no aspect of the human population on the planet that's not somehow impacted by the concept of divorce. And I'm not taking this from anywhere. I'm just sharing with you an observation. Okay, if you think about it, when the generations were on a much higher level, and when men had more than one wife, right? But even those, everything was kept with kedusha and tahara. This wasn't like a free for all, right? The ways of the goyim, of men being with more than one woman at a time, chas v'shalom, this is a concept that is completely contrary to Torah. Okay, when a tzaddik or a man had more than one wife, which was very common, every woman had her own home. Everything was done with tznius. Everything was done with kedusha and tahara. But through that mechanism of having more than one wife, there were huge numbers of children brought into the world by every man. Okay? Today we don't have that. Today polygamy is illegal, both in the civil law and even in Torah law. Torah law does not allow more than one wife in today's generation. I think in part that's because the Rebbeim saw the degradation of the generations going down and down, and the inability to maintain kedusha and tahara by having multiple households. I don't know how many of your husbands can handle more than one wife. Tell me one, and I'll be really, really impressed. Like, really, one wife is enough, right? In today's day and age. So instead, what happens, and again, this is just an observation. I didn't read this anywhere. I'm just observing. How does Hashem go through the process of bringing all of these Gilgulim back? How does He start to bring all of these souls and all of the myriad of combinations of this one has to have this father and this one has to have this mother and this soul needs this dynamic and has to be born into this location and this geography at this time, and so infinite calculations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making for every neshama that He's bringing back into the world right now. Divorce. How are you going to have one man have children with more than one woman if polygamy is illegal, technically, according to the Torah and the civil law? The only way is that he has to be able to be with more than one woman at various points in time. And the only answer to that is legal divorce. So it's a consideration to think about, to reflect, as we've talked about the idea of to think about what is going on around us. So, when you have situations of divorce, you say, okay, well, that child had to come from those two parents at that point in time, and those children had to come through those two parents. That maybe it's that same mother, or maybe it's that same father with a different spouse, and it's a different set of kids. But regardless, all of these neshamos are coming back as Hashem prepares the world for Mashiach. Okay? Does this make sense, what I'm saying so far? Okay, so you're beginning to understand. So now, let me read a little bit about here. So, again, key foundational concept. You have the soul. You have the physical body. This equates to two dimensions, the spiritual dimension and the physical dimension. What we're not going to get into today, which we will get into either next week or the week after, is the fact that even within the spiritual realm are multiple levels, or as they call olamot, worlds, even within the spiritual, okay? But let me read to you, just to support some of the things that we've been discussing from this book of Aryeh Kaplan, okay? So, he's talking here about the essence of Hashem, the essence of God, and that his essence is so brilliant and so all-encompassing because he is one. Everything in Hashem is one. He needs nothing, right? He has everything. He is everything, okay? So how does a creation that he is everything, how does he create something that is theoretically and apparently separate from him, right? Each one of us in a physical body, we know Hashem is not physical. So it's contrary. There's a paradox to say, how does this being that is everything, he is all-encompassing, he is everything we see, everything we feel, everything we are, is him. But now he's created this creation that appears to be separate from him, right? So the Kabbalists answer this question by explaining that God created a spiritual dimension. This dimension is made up of every basic concept that is needed to create and sustain the entire universe. And it is essentially through this spiritual dimension that God interacts with the universe and forms a bridge between God and his creations. And it's a step-down mechanism so that his light does not literally explode everything in the physical universe. So the idea is that his light needs to be filtered little by little through the spiritual dimension before it can come into this dimension as a spiritual soul coming into a physical body. Okay, so this is his mechanism to not overwhelm the physical dimension. All right, so he talks about here, the Talmud provides us with a parable. This is so beautiful. The Talmud provides us with a parable about how this works. A king once built a beautiful palace, decorating it lavishly and stocking it with all the best food and drink. When it was all finished, he invited his guests, saying, "If there are no guests, then what pleasure does the king have with all the good things that he prepared?" After everything had been prepared, the guest, man, Adam, was brought into the world. So Hashem created this vessel, right? The same way that the king built a beautiful palace and filled it with beautiful things and food and drink and looked around him and said, well, what fun is this? Right? What's the purpose of having this big, beautiful palace with all these wonderful things if there's nobody in to enjoy it? So we even see in Breshit, the order in which Hashem created the world. What is the final element of creation? Man. Right? The crowning glory of his creation. was for him to bring man into the world to be able to share everything else that he had created. All right? So it says, no matter how selfless a human act may be, there is always some benefit to the doer, the person doing the act, even if it's nothing more than a sense of self-satisfaction. God, on the other hand, has no need for anything. God has no need to create a world, and there was no lack in him that creation could satisfy. Creation was therefore the most perfect act of altruism, of love and goodness and sharing. So Hashem is always the giver, and mankind is always the receiver. Okay? All right. I want to now tie in, and this is going to be the last thing we're going to touch on before we finish the shiur for today. And again, these are really, really foundational pieces. You can take time, you can go back through, you can listen to it again. The one key aspect of creation that Hashem had to bring into being in order for us as creations of God to refine ourselves and to earn the goodness of everything he can and wants to give us is the concept of free will. If man did not have free will, there is no way that we would be able to really accept and maximize all the good that Hashem wants to share with us. Hashem had to gift us with the concept of free will so that we could freely choose whether to accept what he's giving us or chas v'shalom reject what he's giving us, so that in the end of the day, everything that we earn is exactly that. It's something that we have worked for in terms of receiving the goodness that Hashem is bestowing down upon us. So let me read this to you. God wanted us to bear full responsibility for our actions, and he wanted us to earn full credit for all the good that we do. He wanted human action to be a matter of free choice rather than compulsion. Right? We've talked about this early on in our shiurim. Animals don't have that. Animals are purely compulsive, instinctive creatures. They have no free will. Okay? It's for this reason that free will is one of the most essential ingredients in all of creation. So that when Hashem is bestowing down upon us all the good through the spiritual worlds, and it's filtering down into this physical world, and we are a spiritual being having a physical experience, that our free will is the ticket and the key to engaging with our Creator and earning everything we can through our physical experience to build what will ultimately be ours in the afterlife of Olam Haba. These are very highly complex concepts, but we have to break them down to the simplest way possible for us to manage it, to be able to, the light bulbs to start going off to say, wait a minute. If this is how Hashem created the world, then we have to know that it is with a purpose, with a destination for every single human being. It says, the Talmud answers that we bind ourselves to God by imitating his attributes. So if Hashem is all-encompassing goodness and giving, so then we become closer to our Creator by imitating him. Right? It's the same thing. I used to do a lot of marriage counseling. And when I would have someone say to me, you know what, I don't love the person anymore. We've grown apart, the flame is out, it's really dead, everything is dead. And I don't think it can be brought back. So there was two things I always asked. Do you feel hatred towards the person, or do you feel neutral towards the person? If the person said they felt negative feelings towards the other person, I knew for sure there's plenty to work with there. The bigger challenge was when there was feelings of complete neutrality, not caring anymore. Because the opposite of love is not hate. the opposite of love is total not caring. Just total, what's the word I'm searching for? Not neutrality, but not indecisive. Okay, hopefully the word will come to me, the word. But the bottom line is that the idea is that when there was no feeling left, not caring one way or the other, it was going to be more of a challenge than if there were negative feelings, okay? But one of the things that I would say to a couple that was trying to bring their marriage back, trying to resuscitate the marriage, is I would say start giving to each other. Start giving, okay? Because we understand through Hashem's creation, if Hashem is entirely good and entirely giving and completely whole, and his entire creation is him giving to us, then if we emulate him, right, and we understand also that by him giving to us, it makes him feel closer to us and gives us an opportunity to be closer to him, even though he has no need for it. It's really our need. So if we emulate that, whether it's with a spouse, with a child, with a parent, if we start giving, the minute we give, we develop connection and a closer sense of attachment. Where we give, we feel connected. Where we give to our child, we feel closer. Where we give to a spouse, a friend, we feel closer. It's actually ironic. Oftentimes we think that if we receive from someone, we feel closer. Actually not. The act that creates a closer sense of connection is giving, not receiving. The bigger gift is the giving as opposed to the receiving. Have you guys ever experienced that? Where you give, you feel closer. Where you give tzedakah, right? Let's say there's an organization and you give money to an organization, now you feel connected to their mission and their vision and their cause. Right? So giving, that act of chesed, that act of giving is an act of drawing near, drawing closer. So when we become giving beings, we are actually spiritually drawing closer to our Creator. Does that make sense? Okay, the last thing I want to read here from this book. So it says, thus, free-willed man is the primary and essential element of creation. Everything else created is only a means for bringing about man's closeness to God. All other created things, whether above or below man, exist only for his sake, to provide an environment where he can earn his place in a world which is all good, which is Olam Haba. So in this sentence, we understand that our entire purpose of creation is for us to be able to build a connection to a Kadosh Baruch Hu and to build our place in his eternal world of all good, which is Olam Haba. And so part of our mission in this Olam, in this Gilgul, is to unlock the secrets for ourselves of how to do that. How do we draw close to Hashem? How do we build ourselves in this Olam in order to build our Olam Haba? It is for this reason that God created the two levels of existence, Olam Hazeh, a place of accomplishment and maximum challenge here, and the world of Olam Haba, the world of ultimate reward where both God's existence and nature of one's deeds are completely and totally apparent. Okay? All right. In closing, I want to touch here on what Harav Avigdor Miller writes, because it's like a little bit of a contrast to what we've just read now in Aryeh Kaplan. Okay? So, it starts with an overview of this chapter. It's a very short chapter. It says, conceptually, reincarnation, Gilgul, belongs before Tchias HaMetim because it's not an end in itself. It is a path towards the ultimate end of Olam Haba. Okay, so it's the idea of a soul perfecting itself before the final redemption of Tchias HaMetim. So someone asks Rabbi Avigdor Miller a question. For what punishment does a person come back into this world in a Gilgul to live a second existence? And this is what he replies. This, my old friends, here I know I don't discuss. This subject of Gilgul, you'll have to leave it out. You'll have to go to other people who know more than this to discuss this. It's a principle here not to discuss Gilgulim because it's not in the Gemara. It's in the Sfarim. Since it's not in the Gemara, I don't have any information. My Rebbeim didn't talk to me about this, so I'm not going to talk about it. Now, what's very interesting is that even though he doesn't talk about Gilgulim, he writes an entirely earth-shattering, life-changing book on Olam Haba. So essentially what he's doing is he's kind of shortcutting the whole, and I'm not saying this is a criticism, chas v'shalom. I'm saying this was his way. This was his way of connecting with the subject matter. Is to understand that he's leaving out everything we just talked about for the last several minutes of the olamot and the spiritual world and the physical world and drawing close to Hashem and our purpose here, okay? And he's jumping straight to the finish line, straight to detailing that the idea here is that we want to do it right the first time. We don't want to have to come back in a Gilgul. We need to understand from day one that our whole point is Olam Haba, that everything is being recorded, everything is being witnessed, everything is being seen by Hashem, and everything will be brought before us in 120 years when we go to Beis Din Shel Mala. And we're asked, so show us, what did you do with your life? How did you earn your place in Olam Haba? Right? Not to mention, if you did something wrong, chas v'shalom, how that's going to be cleansed. So Rav Avigdor Miller's approach is to say that we need to make sure that we think about what we're doing here so that we know the end game and the end goal is Olam Haba. Okay? Let me see here what he says. Hold on one second. There was one other piece of this I wanted to read. One second. Oh, so here he's talking about the idea that even though we know the concept of Gilgulim and reincarnation exists, he's writing about the fact that we don't want to count on that. We don't want to count on the fact that we may or may not be given a second go-around, right? We don't know what Hashem will decide to do with our soul once we've gone up. We don't know if he's going to say, you know what, you need to do it better, get back in a body. You're going to be born again and you're going to have to do the whole thing over again and do this part better and do that part better and make this tikkun, etc., etc. We don't know if we'll be that lucky. He might decide and say, chas v'shalom, go sit in that rock for 50 years. That'll clean you up. We have no idea. Go hide in that tree. Go back as a dog. You want to behave like a dog in this lifetime? Fine, go back as a dog. We don't know what he's going to do. Lo aleinu, right? So Rav Avigdor Miller's entire approach is this. Understand you have a soul. Understand you're working towards Olam Haba. But also understand you better do it right. You better educate yourself and learn and try to improve every single day. You have to remember, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not comparing us against our neighbor. When we go in 120 years to Shemayim and we stand in front of the Beis Din, he's not asking, why were you not Rabbi Akiva? In fact, there's an amazing story. If you know about Rav Zusha, Rav Zusha says, he's quoted as saying, I'm not afraid for when they ask me, why weren't you Rabbi Akiva? Because if I say, I wasn't Rabbi Akiva because I didn't have his brilliance. Okay, fine. Or they say, why weren't you this other Rav? I wasn't this other Rav because I didn't have his skills, his learning skills. He said, I'm scared for if they say to me, why weren't you Rav Zusha? You understand? We have to ask ourselves, what's going to happen when Hashem says, why weren't you Mia? Why weren't you Danielle? Why weren't you Sartikva? Why weren't you Gabi? Why weren't you who you were meant to be? I put you in the world with everything you need to become you. Why weren't you you? This is a pivotal and mind-blowing concept. The idea that we're not in competition with our neighbor. We're in competition with ourselves. Right? We're in competition with ourselves to know that in 120 years when we go up, we want to be better, refined, perfected souls. So that when we get up there, Hashem says, Mazel Tov, you don't have to go back. Here's your nice, beautiful seat next to so-and-so in Gan Eden. Enjoy your time. That's the goal.
Don't you think that this should be part of the curriculum in education?
I wish. I really, really wish. I wish in high school that they would start to introduce these concepts a little bit more foundationally, really even just very, very basic. Because, all the information comes to us when it's supposed to come to us, right? Hashem has everything organized for us. So, generally speaking, ideas and concepts come to us when He feels we're ready for it. Because what's the point for Him to come and bring us something that's complicated for us that it's going to go right over our head and we're not going to accept? How many times in the history of your life have you been exposed to something and then 10 years later you're like, oh, I remember that. Now that's interesting to me. Now you have the capacity to begin to think about it and understand it. So I will say this. I trust in the wisdom of the sages, in the Chachamim. I trust in the Rebbeim who know what to introduce and when. There's a reason that certain concepts are not allowed to be studied by men until they're, whatever it is, age 40 and married, and they've studied the entire Shas, and they have all these other foundational concepts before they launch into some of this esoteric subject matter. Okay? But the idea of just understanding that you have a soul and you're in a physical body and you're in a physical world, and what is the point of all of that? To understand that there is a purpose, right? And there is an end game, and that end game is Olam Haba, that this world is just a bridge to get us to where we're meant to go. I wish I could remember where I read it, but there's, stories about the idea, analogies. Actually, I think Rabbi Miller talks about it in this book also. The idea that this world, imagine you were going to the most magnificent banquet that's ever been put on in all time. The most magnificent banquet, the most joy, the most pleasant, the best food, the best wine, the best company, the best atmosphere that's ever in the history of all creation ever been put on. And you come and you walk in the front doors and you're standing in the foyer. And you look around in the foyer and you say, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing place I've ever been. And the person who's there to welcome you says, what are you talking about? You're standing in the foyer. The banquet is through those double doors over there. You haven't seen anything. We're in the foyer. We're in the foyer. We're in the gateway. We're in the bridge between where we were before we entered this world and where we're going to be after. And if we begin to live our lives with this paradigm, with this idea and this concept, that everything in this world is temporary, everything here is for us to utilize to serve Hashem and to elevate our souls, so that when we get to the doors of the banquet hall and we want Him to throw those doors open and welcome us, right? That we are ready. We have come with our arms full to offer and to accept and to enjoy, because we know we've made the most we can in this lifetime, this 80 or whatever, how many years we're blessed with, 100 years, 120 years, B'ezrat Hashem, that we've made the most of it, and that we can just go right into the banquet hall and take our seat and not have to worry about coming back to the foyer and spending another 100 years to do it right. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a lot to digest, right? It's a lot to digest. So on that note, it's already 11:15. I'm going to leave it there for us, and I will really, really encourage you to listen to this lecture again, either the Zoom or the audio. I'll do my best to have everything up and available by tomorrow at the latest, but I think you should listen to it again. And I think you should try to really begin to think about life before this shiur and life after this shiur. Okay? Because for me, there's life before this book, and there's life after this book. And it's two different people. It happened to be, I think I told the story what happened to me. Actually, yesterday was my 2-year anniversary of Su'udah Hoda'ah for Kadosh Baruch Hu that He saved my life from the surgery that I had. I remember telling that story. I had been reading this book. I'd been in the middle of reading this book. I brought it with me to the hospital. I was going to read it in my recovery. You know? And when what happened to me, I remember before I was brought into my second surgery and put under, I remember thinking to myself, Hashem, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't know about Olam Haba in the way I understand now. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Please give me another chance. I'm going to do better. So there's life before this concept, and then there's life after this concept. Right? And it's going to be up to each of you and every person who listens to this shiur to really invest yourself in listening over and over and thinking about these concepts so that you understand the clock is ticking. I'm praying to God the clock is ticking to the time of the revelation of Mashiach, and that it's not about ticking till 120 years when you're in front of Beis Din Shel Ma'ala. I want Mashiach to come now, and I don't want us to have to go to that Beis Din Shel Ma'ala. I'm hoping the clock is ticking towards the fact that we're going to wake up one day and Mashiach is going to be here and the world's going to be a different place, B'ezrat Hashem. But regardless, we have jobs to do here, and we have to make the most of this body and this physical world that Hashem has given us. Okay, was there a final comment?
Well, once Mashiach is here, we cannot make any change of what we've done wrong. So, do we want him to come so quick before we make the change?
You know what? It's an excellent question. It's actually a process that I went through myself and thinking about that, having this kind of like in my head, like, oh my gosh, I need more time. You know, but at the same time, we have to understand that we cannot even begin to comprehend the goodness of what the world will be after Mashiach comes, if we are lucky enough to have the zchut to still be around, you know. And so even in our current form, right, it's going to be better than anything we can possibly experience today. So we have to know that, but we got to get busy, because we don't know how much time we have. We don't know how much time we have until Mashiach comes, and we don't know how much time each one of us personally has. We don't know. And we have to be living with that.
Little side note, I never was into science fiction as a child, but I'm thinking, if we gave kids the opportunity to delve into these realms, I think it could also awaken something. I think it's kind of let's call it science fiction, the Gilgulim. I feel like, perhaps we should introduce that to the children as a, concept.
You know what? I'll tell you something. Every parent has to know who their kids are. They have to, first of all, before we tell our kids about anything, we have to really be internalizing and living what we are quote unquote preaching, if you will, or talking about, right? I can tell you that my kids know all about this. I speak about it freely. They know things that most adults don't know. But that's my house, because that's who I am, and that's, that's what I'm comfortable with, and that's what my kids are comfortable with. So, but I really talk with them a lot about the fact that how their neshama is so important, that they have to protect their neshama, and that's a part of protecting their eyes and protecting what they hear, what they see, where they are, their environment, and understanding that the neshama is important to Hashem, and that we have work to do in this world. I don't think there's anything wrong with with kids knowing that we have work to do here. We have mitzvot that we need to do. We have service to Hashem that we need to do. Those are basic concepts that I think kids, especially young kids, you watch how innocent they are. They're very close to the source. Their neshama knows. Their neshama knows where they came from. They were in the womb learning Torah for 9 months. They know. The neshama knows, right? It's just being in the physical world that mutes everything and kind of numbs everything, because it doesn't take so long to be in the physical world when you already are like forgetting. Why are you here? Where did you come from? Oh, that's a really nice car. Oh, I really like that designer belt. Suddenly there's all these other kind of things that like come into focus as being priorities, and we lose sight of why we're really here. Nothing wrong with enjoying those things, right? Because there's nowhere in the Torah that said we shouldn't enjoy the physical world responsibly, right? But we have to do it with such an understanding that that's not why we're here. It's not why we're here, right? Okay. If there's... Yeah.
That there is definite divide between the Sephardic way of learning about those things than the Ashkenazi way.
Each one has their approach. They all understand about Olam Haba. Rav Avigdor Miller is as Ashkenaz as they come. And he wrote this book that sets the precedent and the tone for, I think, any and all books on Olam Haba. I don't know of a better one. And he's completely Ashkenaz. But you see, his approach is to not come at Olam Haba from Gilgulim. His approach is to come at it from the standpoint of where it's written in the texts and understanding that it's very clear that there is an Olam Haba and there is an Olam Hazeh. So that's across the board. Sephardim tend to be a little bit more into more the Kabbalistic, esoteric, and that's fine too. Either way is fine. Ultimately, all the davening, all the prayers are going to the same place. There is not a Sephardic heaven and an Ashkenazi heaven and a Hasidic heaven and whatever other heaven and a Chabadnik heaven. That doesn't exist. Everything is going to the same place. It's all about how you connect and the different channels in which you're participating in this olam, right? There's no differentiation in Shemayim about your nusach. So and your minhagim and so forth. Olam hazeh and olam haba are for everyone, both Jews and non-Jews alike. Righteous goyim have their own olam haba, completely separate and apart from Jews. But they also have Olam Haba, because those who come into this world to serve Hashem and find their way down that path will be rewarded, regardless of whether they're from the Jewish Etz Chaim or the non-Jewish Etz Chaim. Tree of life, by the way, is what that means. Okay,
thank you so much.
Ladies, thank you very much. You've all been very patient, I think, and listening, and I hope you've enjoyed the shiur. And B'ezrat Hashem, really try to listen to it again. Next week, I'm going to introduce a couple more concepts tied to this ideas that are going to give you a little bit more of an insight into the spiritual aspects of it and how it ties to the physical, and also some things you can do in your davening, in meditation, and generally working to elevate yourself and clear yourself, so that you can become as close to Hashem as possible and have that emanate out into your family, your environment, and the world in general. So I'm wishing you guys a Shabbat Shalom and a beautiful rest of your week, and B'ezrat Hashem that we should all join together again next week.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Recording